let me start by just mentioning briefly a very significant breaking news aspect of the story that's taking place right now. The Russian media, RT and Voice of Russia, have both aired an intercepted phone conversation that took place on February 26th between Catherine Ashton, the foreign minister of the European Union, and the foreign minister of Estonia, who the day before, on February 25th, had been in Kiev and looking into the events in the Maidan. And what he reported to Ashton is that the evidence that he gathered on the ground was that the sniper fire that instigated the final phase of the violence leading to the overthrow of the Yanukovych government had been carried out by people hired by some of the protesters, and that it had not been done by Yanukovych's police forces, and that the same weapons were being used both to kill police and to kill protesters in the Maidan. And more recently, the foreign minister of Estonia confirmed in a news interview the accuracy of the intercepted tape. This means that the EU, from no later than February 26th, had direct evidence and suppressed the evidence that it was the protesters that were carrying out precisely the kind of neo-Nazi violence that the Russians and Yanukovych had been warning about from the very outset. Now, the fact of the matter is that Obama, under particularly the strong influence of key advisors like Susan Rice and Samantha Power, who are fanatical advocates of humanitarian interventionism and regime change, has thrown his weight of support behind the overthrow of a legitimately elected government. And, of course, for Russia, Ukraine represents a very critical and strategic factor right there in the Russian near abroad. The Ukrainian and Russian governments have a treaty under which Russia has access to the critical Black Sea port of Sevastopol, which is Russia's naval access through the Black Sea into the Mediterranean. So this whole issue is of strategic urgency for Putin, and yet Obama has jumped into the middle of this thing and has literally sided with forces that include neo-Nazi elements, some of which trace back to the Stepan Bandera Ukrainian nationalist movement of World War II, which allied militarily with Hitler and on their own carried out brutal executions of Russians, Jews, and Poles. In other words, these were neo-Nazis. And some of the people leading this Maidan protest are the sons and daughters and grandchildren of precisely those neo-Nazis. They're using the same slogans, the same banners of support for the ultra-nationalist Bandera movement. So President Obama is literally drawing the United States into an alliance with a bunch of neo-Nazis, literally, who have overthrown a legitimately elected government, and somehow or other Obama is calling this democracy in action. So the U.S. has waded into a crisis that has no strategic urgency for the U.S., but is an absolute legitimate strategic red line for Russia. The danger here is that despite the fact that U.S. military advisors are telling Obama there's no military option, back off, we need collaboration with the Russians for the withdrawal from Afghanistan and other things, Obama is just so much of a tool of British interests who have their own games they're playing to draw the U.S. into a new Cold War with Russia, that we could wind up not just in a Cold War, but in a hot war that could even lead to an exchange of nuclear weapons. So this is a highly dangerous situation precisely because Obama personally is acting not in U.S. strategic interest, but in the interests of certain London and Wall Street financial circles that are desperate to have the opportunity to loot the riches of the East and will run the risk of thermonuclear war in order to do that. We are aggressively calling for Obama's impeachment on legitimate grounds of violations of the Constitution, but the real underlying reason for that push right now is that Obama is jeopardizing the population of this planet with the imminent threat of general war that could become thermonuclear war by trying to provoke Russia in an area where they have vital strategic interests. So Obama had a 90-minute phone conversation with Putin last Friday in which Putin very calmly laid out Russia's concerns and pointed to the fact that the leading armed forces in the Maidan, who overthrew a legitimately elected government, were tied to certain historic and current neo-Nazi networks, and why was the United States supporting these kinds of elements when they are antithetical to everything that the U.S. fought for in World War II side by side with the Russians? So the Obama policy is dangerously insane and must be defeated by more sane, rational elements in the United States who should seize this moment to bring him down before he takes some action, sanctions or other military action that could lead us to general war.